Uhuru, Uhuru Sasa, which means freedom now. And we are joined on the line by Dr. Gerald Horne, the author of nearly 50 books. And Dr. Horne has been a regular on Diasporic music for 2 decades, I guess. And we are going to be discussing many issues today. And I guess we wanted to begin with Melinda Francis. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. So I just wanted to, this is Black August, and there's a lot of things in August, but today is August 14th, and August 14th in 1791, the Bao Kali Men ceremony was basically started by Bookman and Fatima, which sparked the Haitian Revolution. So it is Bookman Day in Haiti right now. So I wanted to wish everybody a happy Bookman Day. So now we can get into it. Do we want to start with the updates around the Jan 6?
Well, a number of issues. I guess the latest news, as you probably know, is that a few days ago, the FBI raided the Florida estate of Mr. Trump. They carted away many boxes of sensitive top secret material. And since we know that Mr. Trump is not necessarily into reading, that was revealed during the time of his tenure in the White House, the question is, why did he have all of these top secret documents? And since it's Mr. Trump, your mind immediately turns to making money. I mean, for example, to cite the most recent issue in that regard, you know that his first wife, Ivana, just died. He buried her on his golf course in New Jersey and got a tax deduction. So he's even monetizing the death of his first wife. And so the idea is, why would he have all of these documents on nuclear questions? And immediately people suspected that perhaps he wanted to sell these sensitive documents to a foreign country, for example, to Saudi Arabia, which of course has just gifted his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, a $2 billion contract to play with to invest Saudi money. And then there were sensitive documents about President Macron of France. Now, if you could either suspect that A, it was some juicy gossip about President Macron of France, but since it's Mr. Trump, you have to believe that perhaps he wanted to blackmail Mr. Macron of France. There has always been a lot of chatter, at least on this side of the Atlantic, about Mr. Macron's marriage. His wife is decades older. He met her when he was in high school and she was his teacher. And there has been a lot of loose talk about the exact nature of their relationship. And so perhaps he wanted to blackmail Mr. Macron, and I won't speculate why he wanted to blackmail Mr. Macron. In any case, this has led to a very severe backlash amongst the right wing in this country. That is to say that one of Mr. Trump's supporters attacked the FBI office in Cincinnati and in turn was gunned down. A Trump-oriented website, Breitbart News, published the home addresses of FBI agents involved in the raid, which makes them susceptible to being attacked. The judge who issued the order for the estate to be raided is now being persecuted. And this brings me to the other point, and this is part of the problem why, this is part of the reason why the United States might be headed over the cliff, because it's difficult to think of any sector of the US left or body politic that has a real analysis of why Mr. Trump has such a stranglehold over such a significant percentage of the Euro-American electorate, and why they're willing to move heaven and earth to stay on his good side. And that includes many of the members of Congress. And my own opinion is that a lot of it has to do with a misunderstanding of the United States. There's this idea that when there was a retreat of Jim Crow in the last 75 years, that this was something that was unanimously agreed upon, even though we know when Martin Luther King died, he had a disapproval rating of about 63%. And many in the Republican base see Mr. Trump as a bulldozer who can reverse the clock of history. He showed that by forcing through these conservatives on the U.S. Supreme Court, who have now circumscribed women's reproductive freedom. And because many of our folks, even on the left, have a very naive view of the Euro-American electorate. Matter of fact, if you even raise the question or the concept of, quote, Euro-American electorate, they accuse you of being a racist, for example. We're supposed to believe that every constituency votes for Mr. Trump with the same percentage, even though we know that the Black community votes against him 8-2 and 9-1. In fact, let me say that if you look on certain social media sites, you'll see that myself is oftentimes attacked by folks on the left for helping to instigate racist strife by talking the way I'm talking now, and also by saying that the creation of the United States was not some great leap forward for humanity. It was basically a slaveholders' revolt. I'm talking about people on the left who are denouncing me in that regard. The only good news is that thus far they haven't come after me with a machete or a rifle. But in any case, this is the dilemma that we face. Mr. Trump, his estate being raided, supposedly means that there will be no race for the Republican nomination for president. It will be a coronation instead. And that given the practice that the Republicans have had in fixing elections, you could possibly predict that he will be returning to the White House by January 2025.
You're listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96 now. I know that Chairman Omali Ishatella calls our friends on the left. Sometimes he talked about them being the Ku Klux communists. And a friend of mine asked me to ask you the story. Would you you should call the people on our friends on the left the BMW Bolsheviks. Would you accept that analysis?
Well, you know, it's interesting. If you look online, you can see an article by myself entitled Left-Wing White Nationalists. And that's the term that I use, left-wing white nationalists. And this left-wing white nationalists, if we're not careful, they're going to get us all killed. I mean, that's the path that we're heading now. They're going to even get themselves killed to show you how deep and pervasive the propaganda is.
You're listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96. You have another question, Melinda?
Yeah, I guess we didn't talk about it last week, but the Pope was winding down his visit to Canada. He was on a apology tour, and so he's been here for probably about going around to different communities, and it started about 2 weeks ago, I believe. And it was, nationally, televised, and they went to different communities and stuff. I, to be honest, didn't really watch it. I kind of avoided it. I kind of, I'll go on feeds of, my Indigenous friends their reactions, and I think it's like a little bit mixed. I mean, they're, I guess, there's, glad that they, he apologized, but, very mixed because they really didn't name specifically why why the Pope was coming here to apologize. The residential schools, it was, for folks who don't know, it was, a statewide or like a nationwide kind of project with the Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, and Presbyterian Church. There's the churches and the Canada State, and Indigenous children were scooped up and put in these schools. What came out last year when these unmarked graves were discovered, and now within the Indigenous communities, these stories have been going around generations that kids were used, so I guess the kind of mixed thing that I saw online reactions where that actual abuse was not really named. And what does this, apology do? Is it using to placate that and not actually address that? And then also a really interesting thing there was in the opening kind of ceremony that they had when they were welcoming the Pope. I don't know why they were welcoming him. Anyway, so there was a Cree singer that spontaneously, sung at the Pope, and she was singing in Cree, in the tune of the O Canada, basically, sort of denouncing him and turning her back on the Pope. So that was really powerful at that time, at that ceremony. Also, there has been opening up about, there's talks amongst people saying that, the Pope should rescind the doctrine of discovery. And so, yeah, that's my sort of summary of the Pope visit. I don't know what your impressions, Dr. Horne, watching it across the border.
Well, I don't have that much to add. I understand that many of the First Nations in Canada would like to see something beyond an apology, that is to say, returning artifacts that had been seized over the decades, over the centuries. We know that there was a Black American delegation that was at the Vatican just weeks ago talking about reparations, because the Jesuits and other Catholic orders were major enslavers of Africans, and perhaps reparations from the Vatican, which is one of the more affluent entities on planet Earth. You can know that from looking at all these multi-million-dollar damages they've had to pay to all of these young boys who priests were judged to have molested in recent years, leading to Hollywood films like Spotlight, for example. So on the one hand, we can say that Pope Francis, particularly compared to Pope Benedict, his predecessor, the German, Pope Francis, of course, being Argentine, that the current man that we refer to as, quote, His Holiness, unquote, has been a step forward compared to Pope Benedict. Recall that it was Pope Francis who, with regard to the conflict in Ukraine, pointed the finger of accusation at NATO, saying that they were, quote, barking, unquote, at the door of Russia, and that helped to instigate this conflict. That's to the left of many of our friends on the left in the United States, which, of course, given our previous comments, you might say that's not really saying that much, but still. So it's a very striking issue, a very striking illustration of global come religious politics.
And you're listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96. We're speaking with Dr. Gerald Horne. And could you mention the name of your latest volume, sir?
The Counter-Revolution of 1836, Texas Slavery and Jim Crow. and the Roots of U.S. Fascism. In fact, a week from today, I'm giving a Zoom talk at this library in Oakland on Telegraph Avenue. I'm sure you're familiar with Telegraph Avenue. I think it's, well, you know, put those keywords into a search engine and you can sign up.
Okay, now on August 1st, 1978, first of all, this is Black August, and Black August is, well, August is a month that, well, I don't think I know, you know, it was the month that I guess the British colonies were emancipated. It was the month, the birthday of Marcus Mosiah Garvey, which is a couple of days from now, 1887, August 17th. Garvey was born. But also it was Black August in the sense that in 1978, a young man named Qatari Golden, who was a political prisoner, I think Qatari was born somewhere in Louisiana, Monroe, Shreveport. But anyway, Qatari Golden was killed, I think, on August 1st, 1978, and August 1st, 1979, Black August began. But, you know, people have been killed in those prisons in California and throughout the United States before Qatari. But Qatari was the movement used the death of Qatari Golden to basically begin Black August. What are your thoughts on Black August, and how has Black August been commemorated in the United States and around the world?
Well, I'm not really sure to the extent to which it's being celebrated in the United States and around the world. Of course, you could have mentioned, as we did at the top, the Haitian Revolution, the Watts Revolt, the revolt led by Jonathan Jackson of Pasadena in Marin County, California, August 7th, 1970, that led to the trial of Angela Davis and to the death of Jonathan Jackson, helped to deepen the incarceration of Rochelle McGee, who's still serving hard time. I remember a few years ago, I was on the Pacifica station in Berkeley. And they invited me on, they invited me on to talk about Black History Month in February. And so I guess this young commentator was feeling her oats, and so she wanted me to denounce Black History Month in favor of Black August, which I, of course, would not do because that didn't make any sense to me. But that sort of stayed with me as to why was I being pressed to denounce
Black
what
history.
Carter G. Woodson came up with decades ago, and which obviously has a mass base in the United States in favor of Black August. Anyway, those are my impressions with regard to Black August.
And you're listening to Diasporic music on Black Power 96. I guess we wanted to talk about, give an update on the Kenyan elections. I was speaking earlier to our friend, mutual friend, Walter Turner of Africa Today. He does a show on Pacifica stations in San Francisco. And what is taking place with the Kenyan elections? And Kenya is definitely is a Black people in America and Canada and around the world have a soft spot for Kenya, I guess, because of the Mau Mau and many other factors. Could you talk about that Kenyan election?
Well, the elections were over 5, 6, 7 days ago. The ballots are still being counted. It's a close election between Raila Odinga, a son, 77, a son of a founding father, as you well know, and he's 77 years old. This is his fourth or fifth time to try to become president. And the main challenger is William Ruto, who had been the vice president under Uhuru Kenyatta, also the son of a founding father, Jomo Kenyatta. And we're very nervous because previous Kenyan elections that have been close, oftentimes there has been a certain amount of violence and death. We're hoping that this is not the case there. And it also illustrates the importance of elections generally, because elections determine who controls the public sector. And most countries, including the United States, which is supposed to be the headquarters of private enterprise, the public sector is a multi-trillion-dollar entity. And so I recall some years ago when you had a lot of ideological confusion in this country, and also disappointment at the nature of elections for good reason. There were those who suggested that we shouldn't even get involved in elections, even though we're talking about how trillions of dollars are going to be divvied up. And you see that in Kenya because that really is an economic engine, an economic locomotive of that country. And what's interesting about Kenya as well, that they have some of the most well-compensated parliamentarians on planet Earth, interestingly enough, in the east of Africa, and that also the campaign finance laws are very lax, shall we say. And so there was a tidal wave of spending on this election coming from who knows where to a degree. Also, what's interesting is that China became a major issue. The New York Times, in fact, has been having a field day running articles about the Chinese interests in Kenya and lambasting the Nairobi to Mombasa train, which the New York Times claims is a white elephant. And William Ruto, the challenger, to an extent took up that clarion call. So the Kenyan election is illustrative on many different fronts.
You're listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96. Tomorrow morning, you are going to be on the Carl Nelson show. And, you know, a lot of people, Carl Nelson has a huge listenership, not only in North America, but around the world. And what will you be discussing on Carl Nelson's show, and why should people listen to Carl Nelson?
Well, Carl, it's interesting autopsy or interesting cross-section of Black voices that you hear on the Carl Nelson show. It has national reach, unlike many different radio shows. I know, interestingly enough, that a lot of politicians, Mr. Biden has people in the White House who tune into the Carl Nelson show to try to get a read of what Black America is thinking, for example. That's one of the reasons why I consider my appearances there important, because maybe they'll think that I speak for people other than myself. And then Mr. Biden and the White House will act accordingly and say, oh, this propaganda against China is not working very well. Maybe we need to rethink it. Or perhaps we need to raise taxes on the wealthy, because that's what I heard on the Carl Nelson show. So in any event, you know, some of the issues we're going to discuss tomorrow are the same issues we're discussing right here on Diasporic Music, interestingly enough. Although one of the issues I know we will discuss is the 1-year anniversary of the Taliban coming to power again in Afghanistan, which I'm sure will be a moment and of significance to their audience.
So you'll probably be on this show around 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, correct?
Yeah, which is what? Yeah. I think it's 8. I don't know. I'm not really sure. I have on my calendar 7 to 9 Central, so maybe it's 7 to 9 Eastern. Yeah, well,
I'll leave that. I'll leave that one alone. People can do a Google, as you always advise people, type in Mr. or Mrs. Google and check it out. Go ahead.
Yeah. Do we want to touch? We didn't talk about Hiroshima and Nagasaki last week.
Yeah, August 6th, August 9th, 1945. One of the most significant aspects of mass murder in the history of the world, when U.S. forces dropped atomic weapons, the only time atomic weapons have been used on Japan, in the world, but in this instance, of course, on Japan, August 6th, August 9th, and instantaneously tens of thousands of people die. I mean, it's really quite shocking. And of course, once again, you can go onto YouTube and see the results of that. And many people have wondered, understandably, was it coincidental that the first and only time that nuclear weapons have been used, that was used by this white supremacist apartheid state headquartered in Washington against Asian people? Because I've written a couple books about U.S.-Japan, and the United States was infuriated, inflamed with this idea that before the war between U.S. and Japan, Japan was trying to appeal to Black Americans. As I said in one of my books on November 1942, you had Black Americans drilling in military uniform in East St. Louis, Illinois, awaiting a Japanese invasion of the United States that they were going to join on behalf of Japan. And so this was not forgotten when the weapons, when these atomic weapons were dropped.
When you're listening to Diasporic Music, I guess this might be the final question, but there is a new book out on Black communist women. And first of all, is Queen Ottilie Moore, Queen Mother Moore, is she mentioned in that book?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I have the proofs, and the proofs do not have the index, so she might be mentioned in the index. She's not mentioned in terms of the contributors. But of course, in my biography of Ben Davis, which just came out in a new paperback, Black Liberation Red Scare, there's a lot for people who are interested in her communist career. There's a lot in that book on that, because she worked with Ben Davis, the Black communist elected to New York City Council from Harlem in 1943, reelected in 1945, and then put in jail after being convicted in the trial of the century in 1949. And of course, George Crockett, who became a Black congressman from Detroit, and of course was the judge in the trial of the Republic of New Africa, where he did not crack down on them, which brought fierce attacks against him. He was also the trial lawyer in the trial of Ben Davis and his comrades in 1949. And in fact, after the trial, the defendants went to jail and the lawyers went to jail, which was quite extraordinary, because supposedly, as a lawyer, you're supposed to engage in vigorous advocacy on behalf of your clients. But that rule did not hold true for Mr. Crockett and the Communist Party trial of 1949.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else you would like to add, sir?
Let's see now. No,
I don't know if we have time, but there is the Russia-Turkey situation. You want to leave?
Oh, yeah, that's very important. I mean, about a week or so ago, there was a 4-hour one-on-one meeting in Sochi, Russia, between President Putin and President Erdogan of Turkey. And Turkey is playing a double game right now. On the one hand, it's a member of NATO. On the other hand, it refuses to impose sanctions on Russia. On the one hand, it supplies Ukraine with these devastating war weapons, that is to say, military drones. On the other hand, as a result of this meeting, you're going to see economic relations between Turkey and Russia go through the roof. Turkey might even drop out of NATO, believe it or not, which could be a game changer. Turkey, and this is a legacy of the origins of capitalism. Whereas, you know, from my 16th century book, I talked about how it came out of religious conflict, particularly between Ottoman Turkey, the predominant Muslim power, and the Western European Protestants and Catholics. And so Turkey has been a candidate member of the European Union since 1999 and has not been admitted. And so now it's apparently deciding to throw in its lot with Russia and China and the European Economic Union that Russia heads, which is basically the old former Soviet republics plus Russia, all yoked to the Chinese locomotive. So this is very significant. And once again, it's important to talk about Turkey, or Turkea, I should say, because Turkey no longer wants to be called Turkey. It's changed. Its name is now Turkea. And Turkea plays a very important role in Africa, particularly whatever part of Africa where Muslims predominate. I know we're going to talk about that on Carl Nelson tomorrow, August 15th, 2022. And of course, August 15th also marks the anniversary of what W.E.B. Du Bois called one of the most significant dates in world history. That is to say, the independence of what used to be called British India, and the creation, of course, of predominantly Islamic Pakistan, and predominantly, although certainly not exclusively, predominantly Hindu India, of course, with a Sikh minority on both sides of the border.